all this silver just to equal 1 ounce of gold. When it comes to the gold and silver markets, historical performance and indicators are great, but what happens when something like the gold to silver ratio breaks? Meaning, what do you do when gold and silver fundamentals and their market conditions have changed? Is the indicator like a gold and silver ratio even valuable anymore? There are 5 big reasons why I say the gold to silver ratio is broken, which means we have to use and do something different as investors. Here are the 5 reasons why I say the gold and silver ratio is broken. There's been a gradual shift in the gold to silver ratio. Macro outlook and the environment has changed. Current technicals, recent performance, and premiums all lead me to believe that the gold to silver ratio is no longer a reliable indicator. Stick with me as I cover each of these reasons, since there are lots of videos on this site that cover the gold to silver ratio, how it's calculated, and the history of the ratio. Today, I want us to focus on how and why the GSR has increased over time. This shift is critical, as the GSR is typically the foundation for swapping or trading metals, and for some others, it serves as a guide or a marker to determine if they should focus on purchasing more gold or silver at any particular time. Trading or swapping metals is actually one of my favorite strategies and can be very profitable, so I don't want to accidentally send the message that I'm anti this approach. My concern is that over recent history, there have been some significant shifts in gold and silver that made me adjust my thinking and how I intend to use the GSR and swap metals. I originally put this content together for this video about 2 months ago, and then something made me not produce the video, and I'm glad I didn't, as the additional time has given me more data and has only made my feelings that much stronger. And recently, I've received a number of questions and comments about the gold to silver ratio, so what better time to talk about it? Let's talk about it. 1. Gradual shifts in the GSR. There's lots of talk about how the ratio of silver and gold coming out of the ground should be the real ratio for silver and gold pricing. And frankly, that's a philosophical conversation that I think only about 10 of you would really be interested in hearing. When we talk about the GSR, we really tend to talk about it in terms of historical averages, which is usually a very solid approach and an important data point. But it's only one data point. And I become concerned when I hear people talk about using the average as the sole basis to make their decision. It concerns me because rarely should we use one data point to make our decision. I know you're sick of me saying this, but it's true. It's all about the conditions, which is why I want to make sure we cover the GSR. When you look at the GSR in segments of time, you really start to see that the GSR is actually trending higher. Take a look at the screen for some details. For example, for most of the 20th century, the GSR was around 47-1, but over the last 20 years, it's been 65-1. And recently in 2020, the ratio set a new high of 123-1, basically because of the pandemic. And while it did fall back to roughly around 80-1, it now sits at 91-1. So this upward trend really needs to be considered. Number 2, the macro outlook / environment. The macro environment is not an environment where silver in particular thrives. Historically, the price ratio for the GSR has been higher during adversities such as wars, market crises, economic recessions, economic uncertainty, low interest rates, instability in the market, low treasury yields, and weakness of the dollar. And while now not all of those are occurring at this moment, we know the dollar will eventually weaken and interest rates will eventually come back down. But that just sets the stage for the GSR to increase even more. As I've shared before, a particular concern for me right now is also the lack of industrial demand as we enter a recession. These variables could have a tremendous impact on silver's price. And let's be honest here, while I have much love for silver, I gotta tell you, I don't think the average Joe or Joanne really sees silver as a monetary mellow like most of us do. After all, there's a number of reasons why banks have been stockpiling gold and not silver, even with silver at $19. Another macro issue for me is manipulation in the silver market. While it doesn't mean that silver won't increase or even take off at some point, it's also a variable that can't be accounted for. Number 3 and 4, I'm gonna do together as the technicals and the performance. Because I've covered this in previous videos, so I don't wanna go overboard or into great detail here, but what was once a highly correlated relationship between silver and gold prices has now become less reliable more and more over time. Take a look at this first chart that's just gold and silver prices. And while you can see the prices have moved in tandem for decades, you can also see how the spread between their movements has increased since the 1980s, and especially since 2010. You can see that much clearer in this next slide. Here you can see how the correlation coefficient has completely broken down since 2017. Now, also, let's be clear, you don't have to be a nerd like me to see this for yourself. Just think about 2022, this year. How differently have these metals performed? Here's the thing. You can interpret this one or two ways. One, that this means silver is going to outperform gold because it has to come back into that 65-1 alignment. Or you could say that there's a potential shift here and I should take notice. I'm going to let you decide. While I do believe silver will have a very large move from a percentage perspective, because historically it's always done this, all these other factors make me reconsider GSR and think that 65-1 is way too low of an average. And it's particularly based off of our current environment. And then the fifth thing I want you to consider is premiums. While this has been said before, it cannot be understated. While the GSR is simply based on price of gold and silver, with premiums on American Silver Eagles being 78% and 9% on American Gold Eagles, the hidden acquisition cost of silver makes the GSR even less reliable and valuable, in my opinion. Remember, high premiums on gold and silver didn't really exist 5-10 years ago. I mean, we were paying it, but it wasn't like what we see now. And the GSR doesn't account for that. So as we've seen gold and silver struggle recently, and even though it may look attractive at 91-1, I can't help but feel like this is a fake out. While silver looks cheap in comparison to gold based on the ratio, especially with silver at $19, when I look at the current situation, I think we could be in store for more extreme moves in the GSR. When you examine the extremes we've experienced in the past, it seems like we could be headed in that same direction. I wouldn't be surprised to see the GSR hit 115, 110, 125-1. Remember the old saying, gold is a fear trade and silver is a greed trade. So once we get over the fear factor that's in our economy, once the bull market really takes off and gold hits new highs and investors start to run into silver chasing the greed trade, yes, I can see the numbers starting to pull back. But until then, I'm leaning more on gold being a better performer. This is important because the other thing we have to remember, in bull markets, silver tends to have the most explosive growth towards the end. So I think there's time to utilize the GSR as one indicator or data point in how to determine when is the best time to trade from gold to silver in this particular situation. I know some of you like to use the GSR to help you determine whether you should be buying gold or silver at any particular time. No matter what, remember that the GSR is just one data point and should not be used in isolation. Comment, do you use the GSR to help you determine if you should be buying gold or silver? Do you anticipate the GSR increasing, or do you think gold and silver will move in tandem from here? If not, how high do you think the GSR will go? Thank you for seeing this video all the way through. You are always my A+ students. I appreciate your time. Always stack smarter and never stop learning.